All right, it's 1 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome everyone. Good day, and thank you so much for joining us. We're extremely excited to be here with you today. My name's Kunal Arroyo, your host. I'm the Executive Director for the Recruiters Network. And for those of you that have not attended a webinar or recruiting conference in the past, I would love to introduce you to the Recruiters Network and give you a brief overview of who we are. Founded in 2011, the Recruiters Network is an organization committed to professional development opportunities through peer networking and educational conferences for today's leading talent acquisition and human resources professionals. In addition to that, we're an organization that loves giving back to our communities through community outreach, giving campaigns and charitable drives, and much more. We always love getting involved in our communities. Currently, we have 16 regionally based communities, which you can see here highlighted in orange. For those of you that have previously attended one of our meetups, networking events, webinars, or recruiting conferences, you can see that we've rapidly been expanding the past 18 months. And if you're interested in hosting and or being a part of the Recruiters Network and bringing an event to your city, you can reach out to myself, Kunal Arroyo, or any one of our board members found on our webpage. Speaking of events, we do have several upcoming spring recruiter conferences planned, and we'll be launching registration for additional events in the coming weeks. To find out more about any of our upcoming conferences, simply visit us online at www.recruiters.network. All right, so before we get started, some quick housekeeping items for today. First off, all the slides and recordings will be available after the session today for review. And secondly, today's topics have been very popular amongst you, our audience, and we have already received a significant amount of questions for our panelists via email. If any of you have questions throughout the session today, feel free to enter them in the Q&A section of the webinar control panel below. And last but not least, let's get social and share some of the knowledge that you've learned today. Help recruiting and HR professionals who couldn't join today learn from your key takeaways. The hashtag across all social channels is #RecNet. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge our webinar sponsor for today, Glassdoor. You likely know Glassdoor as one of the world's largest job and recruiting sites, which was built on the foundation of increasing workplace transparency. Glassdoor offers millions of latest job listings combined with a growing database of companies' reviews, CEO approval ratings, salary reports, and interview reviews. Check them out if you're interested in learning more, glassdoor.com. All right, and last but not least, to our esteemed speakers, thank you for being here with us today and sharing your insights on how we can think about recruiting in 2020. Without further ado, to introduce our speakers and kick us off, I'll turn it over to our moderator for today, Tiffany Kuhl, Director of HR Search at Verseek. Tiffany, welcome and thank you for moderating.
Thank you, Kunal. I appreciate it. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. As Kunal mentioned, my name is Tiffany Keel, and I am the Director for HR Search at Verseek Search and Consulting in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I'm also a proud member of the Recruiters Network Advisory Board, and very happy to be here with you today to talk through some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we will be facing in talent acquisition, staffing, and recruiting in 2020. And joining me, we have got Stacy, James, Candace, Rebecca, and Jason. And what I would love to do now is have them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are and what they do. Go ahead, Stacy.
Hi. Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Stacy. I have spent over a decade in recruiting and talent acquisition. Started my career, like many of you, at an agency, worked in large companies, and then I spent about 8 years at MongoDB, taking the company from 30 to 1,600 or so. And for my last several years there, worked alongside Jason Buss and had quite a bit of fun. Recently moved over to Newfront Insurance, which is in sort of the insurtech space, and I'm leading talent there now.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. And next we have Candace.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm in Portland, Oregon. My name is Candace Zanuski, and I'm the principal founder of Taylor Talent. We are a RPO and talent acquisition consulting firm, and we support clients in all verticals. We have startups out of San Francisco to mid-size architecture engineering firms and to a multi-billion-dollar organization that we support. I'm also one of the first members of the Oregon Recruiters Network Board, and have enjoyed every moment of that and really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Candace. And next up we have James Parker from our esteemed sponsor organization, Glassdoor.
Yeah, so James Parker from Glassdoor. I have the privilege of leading our go-to-market recruiting teams here. So we have a team here in Chicago, in San Francisco, and then across Europe as well. And I've been with Glassdoor now 3.5 years and have been on the Chicago Recruiters Network board going on a year now, and have been really excited to see the growth we've had and are super excited to continue to grow. And then, based in Chicago. So you're not missing out on a lot right now. It is freezing today. So San Francisco.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James. Next, we have Miss Rebecca Warren, who is with Cracker Barrel.
Hey there, Rebecca Warren. I have been in the TA space for longer than I care to mention. Spent the majority of my TA career in Minnesota, working on both private and public companies, holding permanent roles as well as consulting. I took a leap into restaurants with P.F. Chang's and moved to Arizona a couple years ago, and now currently am with Cracker Barrel. Moved to Tennessee, and I am trying to figure out accents and sassy Southern sayings and all the things that go along with living in the South. So I also run Arizona Recruiters and am really excited to be part of this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And last but certainly not least, we have Jason Buss, who leads talent acquisition for MongoDB.
Yes, thanks, Tiffany, and welcome everyone. Again, my name is Jason Buss. I lead recruiting for MongoDB, and I'm also the founder of the Recruiters Network. Not proud, some days proud, some days not proud. I've been in the recruiting space this year for 25 years. So excited to share some of my key learnings and insights with all of you throughout the day. Thanks, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate you making time to share your knowledge and experience with everyone on the line. And as indicated in the information when you registered for this webinar, we're talking about recruiting in 2020 and hopefully into the next couple of years. So what the panelists are going to do is respond to some of the questions that have come up through conversations amongst us, as well as questions directly from you as participants, whether it's directly to us or in conversations at the various networking events and conferences that have been hosted by the various Recruiters Network communities. So with the challenges that we have been facing over the last few years, we want to take a deeper look into how our jobs and how recruiting is going to be impacted in 2020. So outside of the competitive market, what are some of the biggest challenges in recruiting that you are facing today? And in addition to those challenges, what are you doing to address the challenges? And I will pose this question first to Candace.
I think that companies have been listening when we have said how important it is to be an employer of choice and how important employer branding is just as much as your product or your service. So I think outside of just really tightening up and having excellent recruiting and candidate experience, companies have done overall a really good job of taking care of their employees. Now, certainly not all of them have done that, but the ones who have, those are harder companies to pull talent out of. So I think, a nod to Glassdoor, I think, making sure that you're paying attention to what people are saying about your company, your rating, appreciating the positive feedback, and when you get constructive or negative feedback, I personally pay attention to how do you respond to a negative experience? And I think just as equally, the talent out there that's considering making a move to your company is going to look at how does this company respond to maybe adverse or negative feedback. So I think being ahead of that is really important. Obviously strong bonus packages, opportunities, happy employers and happy employees refer great talent to us too.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Candace. And James, Candace did mention Glassdoor as a tool that people use to do references as far as what an employer is like to work for. What are some of the things that you as an employer do to address the challenges that you're facing with talent acquisition for yourself?
Yeah, so just to echo on that, and then I'll kind of have my spin on that answer. The employer brand component and just candidates wanting to be informed, wanting to make the best possible decision. They're seeking information. So they're wanting to look and find data points to ultimately try and predict their best next move. So yes, there is the employer brand component and reviews and like images and videos and like what's the sentiment of you as an employer to the market. But then that also really needs to truly align with the actual interview process and what's being said within the walls when people do come to interview. And that for us is at Glassdoor, one of our challenges is we've grown so quickly over the last probably 2-3 years that we have so many first-time hiring managers and so many first-time interviewers, and they don't know how to assess for skill. Like, what questions do I ask? How do I both be the detective and the salesperson? And that training process of equipping these people to be brand ambassadors and interviewers is something we're busy going through right now and are developing content that we can train our employees to also be part of our bigger brand.
Excellent. I like that training and training managers, training employees who are part of the interview and selection process. Stacy, from your point of view and your experience, what are some of the challenges that you're facing and how are you going about addressing those particular challenges in your recruitment and selection process and programs?
Sure. So not dissimilar at all to what Candace and James already mentioned. Newfront is a very new business. We're just around 2 years old. And at the beginning of the year, we were something like barely 10 people. So we've really exploded over the last year. We're also in the insurance space, one of the kind of newer insurtech companies. And so talent branding and employer branding is really top of mind for us. We're finding, just even having that word insurance in the initial in-mails can sometimes sort of have a negative connotation or be a little bit of an uphill battle right off the bat. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is, as we have formed this team so recently, really sitting down and figuring out, who we are as a business, who we are to our employees, and how we want to go to market with that message of what an exciting place it is to work. So, talent branding is very top of mind for us. And so that, what we're doing about that is essentially sitting down with our leadership team, having listening sessions with our employees about sort of why they joined and who we are, so that we can have consistent messaging across all of our platforms. Along with, the sort of talent branding space and some of the challenges that we face specifically, also really similar to what James mentioned, we hired close to 150 people this year and are going to experience some explosive growth this year as well. And so it's, how do we train the people who are in the door to experience that wave of interviewing that we're going to have this year? How do we ensure that we're calibrated, that we're asking the right questions, that we have structured interviews, and so training hiring managers and interviewers as well. And then another piece that's sort of top of mind for me as well, which is an area of passion, is diversity hiring, and how as a startup with, not unlimited resources, how are we attracting folks that we want in the company from a diversity perspective.
Great, very good. Thank you, Stacy, appreciate that. And in addition to the challenges, another challenge for us, those of us that have led teams, are planning to lead teams, have been in recruiting, staffing, and talent acquisition for several years, we understand that the responsibilities we have are constantly changing. There's a new tool, there's a new resource, there's new research. Given that, what actions are you taking within your organizations to continue to develop your teams? And James, we'll start with you. You talked a little bit about training when it comes to specifically the recruitment process, like hands-on day-to-day. But what are you doing to continue to help your recruiters evolve and develop as things that are impacting our jobs change?
Yeah, I think when you think back to like core recruiting back in the day, it was finding the right candidate for the right role at the right company. And once you kind of found that, it was like, we're done. In today's market, you do all of that, and this candidate now has 4 other offers competing as well. And it's like the first time where it's like there's truly just, it's like an unridiculous amount of competition. So I know your first question was avoiding the competitive market. Second question, I'm going to dive right into that. So because of the nature of how candidate-driven the market is, the question I ask each recruiter on my team is what are you doing to be the differentiator? If there are 3 similar offers, 3 similar companies, like why are they going to pick us? And what are you doing as the recruiter to encourage that or be our unfair advantage? So when training and teaching the teams, it's truly helping them lean into that last 10%. We talk about, 90% of the time is talking about the stuff you need to talk about, assess all the different things. And then the final 10% is really leaning into and showing that empathy and becoming their true advocate and earning their trust and building a relationship and showing them that you care more than other recruiters care. And ultimately being an extension of your company. You as their recruiter are in that moment that they tangibly experience of what it's like to work at the company or at Glassdoor. So for me, that's what we're training now is how to be empathetic, how to ask deeper questions, how to build trust, engage, and then finally, how to innovate. What's the roadblock? What's preventing us from hiring these candidates? Is it time? Is it too many people on the loop? Is it the wrong type of assessment? What are the roadblocks and how can we navigate around those and innovate to improve? Because the process needs to change given that the market has changed.
Excellent. That a great insight.
We got to see that dog on the screen at some point.
Whoever has a dog with him and working from home, show that puppy. Rebecca, I know that you've recently joined Cracker Barrel and you've had some experience developing and growing teams and programs and processes. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, especially being a newer leader into the organization when it comes to developing your recruitment team.
Yeah, so I have a great team. I have folks that are remote, and then I also have folks that are in the home office. And so one of the things that I realized when I started was that there was a lot of separation. The home office team was very disconnected from the remote folks, and the remote recruiters weren't necessarily always working together as well. And so I moved into a model of doing one-on-ones with all of my team, and I felt like there was a lot of information that was going up to me, and then I was trying to figure out, how do I develop best practices? How do I get people to work together? How do we make sure that all of the information that we're gathering and the great insights are getting out to the right folks at the right time? And so I switched up the teams a little bit. One of the first things I did was I put in Slack, and we have several different channels on Slack. We have a general one, and then we have one that's focused on iCIMS, which is our ATS provider. We have some that are focused on best practices so that we could all start sharing together. And that was a big deal for the home office team and my remote team to be able to work together and learn from each other. And then one of the things that I've also done is I love being able to chat with all of my team members, but it's really tough, especially trying to build out strategy and get a chance to do the other things that I need to do. And so I restructured the team into squads. And so we have in the in the field, we have 3 people form up a squad. And so I have 3 squads in the field, and then we have a squad at the home office. And their opportunity is to work together once a week to share best practices, figure out where they have challenges, and how can they support each other on a horizontal level, and then working on doing one-on-ones and also following up with what they've talked about in their squads with me on a regular basis. And so there's no owner of the squad, like all 3 of the folks on each squad own it. And then they're responsible for making sure that the right information gets up to me. And then I also get an opportunity to meet with them on a regular basis. So I think that's really going to help us with information sharing, making sure that the collective information is getting out there, but that they're also working together and sharing that information that maybe they don't realize isn't being shared right now. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do to get everybody connected and to share best practices and to let them know overall that I'm listening, I'm here, I have their back, and fighting the battles in the home office.
Awesome. Love that connectivity across the team, even though they're not all based in the same location. Jason, I know that you've also had a similar experience when it comes to teams not all being in the same place. You've got global teams that you've worked with, you have multi-sites. What are some of the things you do or have done to ensure that they are continuing to develop, or what are some of the plans you have for this year and the coming years to bring learning and development to your talent acquisition teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So using MongoDB specifically, over the last 4 years, when I joined the company, the team was roughly 10 people. We're just around 100 today. In recruiting, we were in 2 locations when I joined. The recruiting team is now in 13 locations globally. So varying degrees of roles that we have across the team. And I think one of the first things I look at is, having a one-size-fits-all strategy just does not work. We have recruiters who are newer to the profession, and then we have recruiters, who have 25 years of experience like myself. So making sure that you have, tailored solutions. When the team was much smaller, I would say, we leveraged training platforms, content around, how to become more advisory in your role, as well as sourcing training, some of those basic kinds of things. But the reality is most training, I think we know, happens on the job, right? It's a stretch opportunity. It's put in an uncomfortable situation versus, going to a class or something like that. So really trying to set people up with what their goals are from a career perspective and making sure it's aligned, from a business standpoint, and having that view of where they're at in their career and their role, and then customizing, for each of the team members accordingly.
Fabulous. In addition, Jason, you mentioned some where we are in our careers, and on that same note of development, learning and development, growth. Thinking about a new recruiter, someone who is fresh out of school, or they've transitioned from one function or discipline into recruiting, and now pose this to you, James, coming off of the information Jason just shared. What 1 or 2 skills would you say a newer recruiter would need to hone or focus in on or get training on in order to help them differentiate their own performance in 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, so this one kind of sits close to home for me. We had a recruiter who had never recruited before join the team in the last year. So I'm just going to use this as an example. So for him, we worked on having the end in mind and like thinking about what is the outcome, and then working backwards from that to actually direct your day-to-day busyness. There are so many people you could talk to on the phone. You could fill every second of the day doing phone screens. And that is what was happening with this individual. Was there was a role he looked through, these 20 people look great. So he started sending out emails, and like 15 responded. And in the next couple of days, his days were packed and he couldn't do the other stuff that recruiting takes. So by doing that, it was like, you have one role. Let's look at the data from our applicant tracking system. How many on-sites do we need? How many phone screens do we need? How many people do you need to speak to? Now let's not do more than that just yet. Like you've got several recs that you need your undivided attention on. So just adding structure was big. And then he had another role that didn't have volume. He's like, I just don't have time to source. And I'm like, yeah, but if you need to source, you need to block off times to source. Like put that in your calendar to keep you accountable to doing it. You need to fill out more scorecards. You go home, block that time off. You need to sync with hiring managers, block that time off. So for him, it was just teaching him to be structured, still in a flexible way, because we all know things are going to happen and there's like something needs to change. But it was just like the root fundamentals of structuring your work week and your calendar to be an effective recruiter was huge. And now we're able to add on the layers of like how to be a good sourcer, how to be a good negotiator. These are all kind of secondary things to that core principle. And that's what came to mind for me. Excellent.
I love that idea of blocking time to make sure you're getting the fundamentals addressed and then start building off of that. Candace, for you, what are some things that you would recommend or that you're doing for someone who's a newer recruiter to help them hone their skills in 2020?
Sure. This is something that I think is really near and dear to my heart, something I'm super passionate about. So I was very excited to see this question. One, because I've been a recruiter for a long time. I've managed recruiting teams. I've recruited recruiters and even have gotten to build recruiting teams. So I think I have this conversation often. So there's two sides that I usually approach this question. So one is just the innate skills of the individual. I think we have to be authentic. We have to earn credibility, and how we do that is by doing what we say we're going to do. We are working with people, not robots, and so that is the beauty of building that rapport relationship. And I always try to remind my recruiters and my teams and even myself what it's like to be in that candidate's shoes. And so I often challenge my recruiters, go interview. Remember what it's like to be on that other side, because it sometimes is intimidating. I think, like I always try to put the equation out there, we've got the candidate plus the hiring manager. Our role is to be that plus, whether or not the candidate or that role gets filled. That connection, and every connection matters. It's not transactional anymore. It is absolutely about relationships, and those relationships carry with you as a recruiter, whether you stay at your company forever and ever or you go on to other spots. I think on the other side of, like, outside of the personality, how to recruit, I'm always looking at kind of the front end of recruiting. So when you have a really challenging role, you have to become the candidate. You have to learn how to think like the candidate, talk like the candidate, be in the circles that your ideal candidate is in. And the better and faster you can do that, the better and faster you're going to connect and understand what the good versus the great talent in that circle is. So I love to geek out on, a new challenging role and just understand everything I possibly can, not only from the hiring managers, but also the candidate.
Awesome. I love what you had to say, Candace, about going through the interview process. I think too often we forget what it's like to be a candidate. So putting ourselves in the candidate's shoes is huge. And I think the theme that I'm hearing from you right now is about being human, being real, being authentic, and then finding ways to engage with candidates throughout the process. And I think putting yourself in their spot is going to go a long way. So thank you for that. Early on, we talked about the challenges, and one of the challenges is kind of engagement, so to speak, or newer hiring managers. James, I think you mentioned at Glassdoor, you have a lot of managers who are newer, or they don't necessarily go through the interview and selection process frequently. So what would you say you are doing to drive that engagement in the process, especially considering that they may only hire once or twice a year, maybe once every other year? But what are you doing to drive hiring manager engagement when it comes to your employment brand, your recruiting and hiring process?
Yeah, so recruiters kind of strip back everything. At the end of the day, we're storytellers. We're trying to understand the story this candidate wants to be told. If you think like a movie, or do they like action, or do they want romance? Are they drama driven? And then we're trying to figure out what way to tell that story to them that resonates. And there's so many things we could tell them about working here and so many questions we could ask, but ultimately in that phone screen, we're wanting to understand the story that we need to tell this candidate. And then the process is us being storytellers as a combined group. So the alignment across everybody involved in the recruiting process needs to be strong. So for us, it's stripping it back down to our core values as a company. What are our core values? And then how does that show up on your team, or how does that show up in your personal story at Glassdoor as an interviewer? And then how are you telling that while you're interviewing this candidate? And each person kind of has their bit of that story. And as they become more seasoned and as we're recruiting more with different teams, I think of our SMB sales team here, we've hired 200-300 people, and this has become a well-oiled machine, where each hiring manager and each interviewer knows like what part of the story they're telling. And ultimately, when it does come together, it's a very succinct message. And your employer brand externally into candidates is just a slightly repurposed version of your EVP internally. So that's the same thing. So yeah, that's what we do. It's just a lot of talking about and training, and you need to be intentional about it. You can't just show up and ask questions and hope that this candidate thinks you're a great place to work. You really need to have a good story, and that's what we spend a lot of time doing is storytelling.
Fabulous. Thank you. And Candace, what about in your area? So with Tailored Talent, what are some of the things you do with your hiring leaders to ensure that they're engaged and they are ready to talk about what the employee value proposition is? They're ready to effectively move through the selection process.
Sure. Just like I set expectations with the candidates, we have to set really good, solid expectations and engage the hiring manager from the get-go. I know sometimes that can be challenging. Hiring managers are busy, they're stressed out, and they're like, I need this filled, and go do your thing. At the same token, the better you can relate and connect to your hiring managers to help tell their stories, but also like, if they're really passionate about their team, they're going to want to have some help in pulling in and getting the word out about this opening on their team. And so to James' point, helping them unlock and tell that story. Every time I post a new position, and I set this expectation from the get-go, as soon as that position's posted, I'm sending the link to the hiring manager and saying, here's the link to your posting. One, it kind of keeps me accountable, like everything, through approval and whatever looks good. But also then I'm helping them to get these posted on their social media platforms. And I also encourage them to take it a step further and share that link with the folks on their team for their teams to post those links onto their social media, their professional networks, their alumni associations. And then it just helps to just get the ball rolling and to evangelize, hey, this is out here and this is why. Come be my peer or come be on my team and why. One of my favorite hiring leaders, he wrote an article about this position, and he just really did a beautiful job. I use him as my example to a lot of people, but he did such a great job of just showing who he is at his core and what it's like to work with him. I lucked out because he gave me a nod in there too, and and said, reach out to me or Candace. But that just was emulated the pure partnership between a recruiter and a hiring leader to both engage and get things moving really quickly and tell a story from the get-go.
And I'm just going to quickly add on that setting expectations is so huge. Like, as you said that, I just did the biggest nod. Because we are their partner and their trusted advisor, and often like they're leading to us for best judgment or what should we do, or like, this candidate, like, give me the insight, like, what should I talk about? We get to be almost the like project manager that's pulling all these different pieces together and setting those expectations up with the hiring manager and then equipping them with what they need to be great interviewers. Like, couldn't agree more.
Excellent. Thank you both. Appreciate that insight. And want to switch it up just a little bit and talk about some technology, so to speak, and want to understand, as we've heard about, as in particular over the last handful of years, artificial intelligence or AI, machine learning. want to understand how we are incorporating that successfully into our recruitment and selection process in our program. So Rebecca, if you could help us understand how you have done that or what you are planning to do for this year, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, so I absolutely love tech and making things easier for everyone, taking away those non-value added steps so we can focus on the things that really do help us get better and move more quickly. You know, one of the things I heard at a summit this past fall that really resonated with me, though, as I think about both sides, is that we should be using AI or machine learning to complement or streamline our processes, but not to make business decisions. So when I'm looking at what we're doing, I'm using it in a way to help us make things easier, but not to take the humanity out of the process. For instance, using assessments. We absolutely use assessments, but we use them as a decision point, not as a knockout, because I certainly don't want to have technology make our business decisions. So some of the things that we are doing on a tech standpoint is we use iSIMS, and so we are implementing text recruit and text apply. We have a self-scheduler tool that we're putting in place for our hourly candidates to be able to schedule their own interviews on the restaurant's calendars. We're using, of course, all of the things to get our jobs in front of folks digitally. So we have lots of partners who are helping us make sure that we're in front of all the right people at all the right times. You know, one of the things that's really been helpful for us and learning about where we can improve is using predictive analytics. And so we have a team that helps us do that. And that's been really insightful as we think about where we should spend our energy and our time the best. So we're looking at evaluating the health of our stores through data. When a new manager comes in, what happens to the store month over month, guest satisfaction, revenue, turnover, how does that help us hire and train better? We're also looking at data to help us understand, for instance, from a predictive space, looking 12 weeks out. What are we expecting for turnover? How do we get ahead of that? How do we proactively hire? And then also looking at turnover from a perspective of if we can keep it flat or continue to reduce it, it's an amazing differentiator for us. So you think about for every 1% of turnover, it costs about $1 million. That's a big deal for us. And so we're continually looking at that. We also have a system, if you've been into a Cracker Barrel store, you may have seen the aprons, and we use that as a training tool as well. So if you were to go in and you were to see somebody, they have either says rising star or they have 1 to 4 stars on their apron, and that shows the level of training that they have through the system or through our system. And we have noticed through our predictive analytics and through our data that we have a much greater chance of losing people if they're in the rising star bucket, so they're brand new, or if they're at a par level 1. And so we use that data to say, when we get to par level 2, we have a significant drop in turnover. So how do we really engage folks when they onboard, when they come into the system? How do we help them stay? So when they get to that par level 2, our turnover is reduced. And that also then helps us on the front end, because then we're not hiring as many people and churning and burning. So we're using a lot of different things to help us get to the right place where we can take the non-value added steps out, but then also add in the human touch as well.
That's awesome. Rebecca, you mentioned an analytics team. Real quick, is that team, whether it's 1 or 2 or 7 people, are they embedded in HR, or are they dedicated to the TA team? Where does that group reside?
Yeah, great question. So it is a small but mighty team. They do spend a lot of time with us. They don't live in TA, but spend a lot of time helping us with that data that we need. So they have built dashboards for us that we can look at through Tableau that help us look on a daily basis. Where are our numbers? What does it look like for our applicant flow across the system? How does it help us look at overstaffing and understaffing. So they've built a lot of custom reports for us and dashboards that we can take a look at. And it has been fantastic to be able to have real-time data to be able to make decisions.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. And on that note, as we're talking about the use of AI, technology, dashboards, I want to talk a little bit about recruiting metrics. So I know we all have used them. We've probably all created and used dashboards. And then early on, James, you talked about your example with your new recruiter and helping that person understand how many phone screens they should be having and how that the ratio of phone screens to interviews, things along those lines. So what I would like to know and have you share, Stacy, I'll pose this to you, as people are trying to figure out right now, right here and now, what's the most important. If you could track only 2 metrics that were critical to recruiting, talent acquisition, and the work that your recruiting teams are doing, what would those 2 metrics be and why?
All right. I was muted, making sure I wasn't the one with the dog in the background. Thanks, Tiffany. This was a pretty difficult question to just come down to 2 metrics. I'm a pretty data-driven person, and I love my data. I love my metrics. So to think about just 2 that really represent the business, the first one that I decided on was offer acceptance rate. And the way that I look at this is not only holistically from a company perspective, what's our overall acceptance rate, but then you can sort of cut that by department, you can cut it by hiring manager, and you can cut it by recruiter. Because at the end of the day, if we're doing all of this work to get the candidate to the finish line and they're not accepting the offer, there's a lot that's broken in the process that we need to take a look at. And I think that reducing the offer acceptance rate to very specific pieces of the business helps you really figure out, you know, is there a hiring manager that's not giving a great experience, or is there a department that's lagging in, you know, time to fill and it takes people 3 months to get through the process? You know, is there a team who is giving some particular case study or challenge that isn't resonating with candidates and they're thinking, you know, this isn't the right place for me to work? It can tell you a lot about your EVP. It can tell you a lot about your total rewards, and you can use that data to filter back up to your HR team and your leadership team that, you know, our offer acceptance rate is X because we don't offer this benefit that our talent competitors offer. And so that was kind of my top choice. My second choice was surveying candidate experience, which is obviously very related to offer acceptance, but especially at a small company and especially at a startup where you're sort of trying to make a name in the market, candidate experience is really everything. It can make or break that offer acceptance rate when you're going up against larger companies that have, you know, more cash to offer, more equity to offer, you know, more total rewards to offer. But not only that, it's really important within your sort of overall branding strategy, ensuring that, you know, anyone that comes on site with you or anyone that talks to one of your recruiters or your hiring managers is having a phenomenal experience, and they're saying, you know, if I get the job, I absolutely want to work here. And if I don't, I'm going to apply again in another year or 2 years because this seems like such a great place to work. And they're going to become your own talent brand ambassador based on the experience that they've had with you. So I chose candidate experience as second. And then as a tie for third, I know you only asked for 2, but 2 other things that I think are really important are first-year fail rate with new hires. And so looking at the amount of employees who within their first year are either exited from the business or decide to exit the business. And this really relays back mostly to the experience that they had in the recruiting process. Were they a mismatch for the job? Did we sell the job incorrectly? Are we assessing candidates incorrectly? And so I think that that's really, really important to start to look at. And then the other thing was time and process, because, you know, depending on the size of your organization, I always view speed as a competitive advantage. So time and process is also fairly important to me.
Great. And Stacy, with regard to those specific metrics, so looking at whether it's your attrition rate or not attrition or time to fill, but your offer acceptance. So the first two that you mentioned, so your offer acceptance and your candidate satisfaction. How do you know what the right target is? How do you, if you're doing a benchmark, how do you know what's red? How do you know what's yellow? How do you know what's green? What's the right target to look at?
Sure. I mean, I think there's so many variables, but at first it's really just getting a baseline. You know, I think a lot of companies, it's really hard for them to even understand what their offer acceptance rate is if they haven't started a foundational practice of data integrity and paying really close attention to what's going on there. You know, I think it's very situational based on where your company is located. You know, if you're a company in the Bay Area or New York, where markets are really, really competitive, your benchmark or your good offer acceptance rate might look very different from a company that's not in perhaps as competitive as a marketplace. I think depending on, you know, the size of your company, the newness of your company, all of those things sort of factor in. I'm very new to my company. I'm less than 3 months in, so I'm still sort of figuring that out. But when I was at MongoDB, our offer acceptance rate usually hovered around 85 to 90%. And that was a phenomenal acceptance rate and something we were really, really proud of. I generally think something around the 70 percentile is usually good. I think anything below that, you should look sort of at some of your practices of the benefits you're offering, your closing conversations, all of that.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that additional insight. In addition to the metrics, you also briefly early on talked a little bit about diversity, inclusion, equity, as we're talking about challenges in recruiting. So what resources or strategies are you personally using or your team are using in your selection process?
Sure. So my general philosophy around diversity hiring is to increase your chances of hiring a diverse candidate at every step of the way. You know, it's a really, really difficult thing to get right. And even if you have all the resources in the world, I think something like, you know, when Google first put out their stats about their diversity hiring, they then put something ridiculous like $50 million or something into diversity hiring and showed that that didn't really move the needle significantly at all. So if you can't move the needle with $50 million, how do you move the needle? And for me, as I mentioned, it's really about increasing the chances of hiring a diverse candidate at every step of the way. So what I mean by that is, from job posting, is your job posting using inclusive language? There's a lot of tools that you can run job postings through that will call out specific language that might be a deterrent for underrepresented groups or female candidates. So taking a look, you know, at the very first step of your job posting, where is your job being posted? You know, are you just doing the bare minimum and are you just having it on your website and maybe it goes out to, you know, Glassdoor or LinkedIn, or are you specifically targeting groups that you think would have a great candidate pool? Not only from, you know, specific underrepresented groups on LinkedIn, alumni groups, but there's job boards for all sorts of underrepresented groups. And so it's really about being thoughtful of where that candidate pool can come from. And then interviewing, you know, are you an inclusive interviewer? And are your interviewing practices inclusive? I think I saw recently that Facebook has a really cool sort of tagline in when you apply to them and, you know, you're going on site for an interview, and there's a piece in their process that says, you know, we make all reasonable accommodations for those with disabilities. Email this, you know, handle if we can make specific accommodations for you in your interview process. And I think that that's really, really, that's just a huge step in being very inclusive in your hiring practices. So when a person is on site, you know, are you saying, we have a coding challenge, but you can take it in 3 different ways depending on what's most comfortable for you? Or are you being very narrow in what you're allowing candidates to showcase their skill set? Interview panels as well. Are you having people that look like your candidates or your ideal diverse candidates on the interview panel? You know, is a woman coming through and everyone on her interview panel is male, or, you know, there's a person of color and everyone that they're interviewing with is, you know, white? And how does this make this person feel about the opportunities and the inclusiveness of the company? And then I think also taking a look at a lot of your total rewards and the benefits that you offer. Are they inclusive to the types of groups of people that you want to attract? And then another thing that I really try to keep in mind and try to keep top of mind for people that are interested or passionate about diversity, oftentimes I feel like the conversation can feel very one-dimensional and it focuses on women and just getting more women in the door. And so I really encourage hiring managers and people who say, you know, Stacey, I have an opening, I want to get a diverse candidate in. It's sort of like open your eyes to the other types of diversity that exists. There's people with, you know, who are diverse that you can't see upon first glance. So are you targeting veterans? Are you targeting, you know, someone from the LGBTQ community? You know, how are your practices really making sure that you're attracting folks from a whole different group? You know, socioeconomic diversity, you know, that's something that you can't see off the bat. So I usually sort of play back to those hiring managers, you know, what types of diversity are you really, you know, looking for?
Excellent. Amazing insight, Stacey. Thank you for sharing your experience and some of the things that you have done with DE&I in recruiting. Candace, this next one is for you, and that comes to the creativity and innovation when it comes to candidate engagement. So especially now, so 2020, the last couple of years, unemployment has been so incredibly low. We're you know, being tasked with trying to pull people out of their current roles and then keep them entertained and engaged throughout the entire process. So what are some of the things that you have done from the creative front to help keep people engaged throughout that entire process?
Yeah, I think how I kind of hit on candidates go and do their holistic research on the company as they're considering an opportunity. It's equally important for us as the recruiters in the process to get a holistic view on the candidate. So often we'll just lean on a resume or a LinkedIn profile, and yet at the end of the day, we know that that one piece of information here and there isn't the all-encompassing holistic view of the candidate. I know we have, I personally have bits of information on me on Facebook, and then another bit of me is on Instagram, and another bit of me is on Twitter, and so we've got all these tiny bits and pieces to us as individuals, and our candidates have bits on all these spots. But we need to do a really good job in 2020 to harness all of these bits of information into a holistic view onto the candidate. And I think the better that we get that view, then we also have a better way of attracting and connecting and finding those motivating factors that might get a candidate to talk to us. So, you know, obviously Pinterest, YouTube, GitHub, Snapchat, those are all great spots to identify candidates, but again, they only give you a small piece. So tools like Zap Info, Seek Out, there's a variety of different tools. Even a lot of ATS systems are starting to have add-ons where you can get a better idea of a candidate from all of kind of their social media combined into one space. I think that's where the big differentiator in 2020 for engaging and identifying candidates is really going to be.
Thank you, Candace. And additionally, as we're looking to fill roles, a lot of times part of that strategy is looking internally, looking at high potentials, looking at succession planning, who's ready to rotate into another opportunity. So Jason, I know throughout your experience, you've developed a variety of recruitment strategies, including internal promotions, internal movement programs, things along those lines. So what one or two key insights do you have when it comes to internal mobility and tapping people internally to fill different roles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've seen kind of throughout my career varying statistics around what % of your jobs are filled by internal people. And on the low end, I've seen, 5%. And on the high end in the organizations that I've worked in, it's gone up to 20 to 25%. So I think there's a few key factors that people need to think about when looking at internal mobility. A couple of those would be, do you have a different instance of your job postings? Are you posting your jobs internally before externally so people can apply? Are your recruiters sourcing talent internally, or are they only sourcing for external candidates? So how you know what skills people have, what time horizons they're looking. So really kind of taking that, internal career coach viewpoint on that. So beyond the application, some of the other program requirements I think that are important to consider is, do you have time and job requirements? So you have to be in your role, 12 months, 18 months, et cetera. Do you have to inform your manager if you even want to have an exploratory conversation, as an example? And I think, throughout my career, the number one caution or red flag that I would give people around this topic is making sure that managers across the entire organization are skilled to have these conversations, because I've seen employees who are afraid to tell their manager, hey, I just want to have an exploratory conversation and check out this other role. And if managers aren't equipped or skilled to engage in that dialogue with their employee, any internal mobility program, no matter how much parameters you put, technology you put around it, it just won't succeed. So I think that would be one of the key highlights that I would recommend people look at.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate that. And I do believe we had, there were a couple of questions that did come in chat. With that, I will keep an eye open here for additional questions as we close out, but I will turn things back over to Kunal.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Hey, I have something here for you. So a lot of recruiters said to a job candidate, in this job, we need someone who is responsible. And the job candidate replies, I'm the one you want. In my last job, anytime something went wrong, they said I was responsible. So with that, hey, thanks, Tiffany. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers, Stacy, Candace, Rebecca, James, and Jason, for providing such valuable insight. This has really been a delight. And again, thank you to our partners, Glassdoor, for being such an amazing sponsors. And of course, and most importantly, thank you to everyone who signed up to join us today. This would not be possible without you. So I'm incredibly happy we've been able to have this conversation today. I hope all of you were able to take away some actionable items that we can use going into the new year. And as we wrap up, don't forget to check out our upcoming conferences this spring near you at www.recruiters.network. Until next time, if there's no further questions, I'm Kunal Roya. We're the Recruiters Network. Thank you so much.
Bye.